of prayer the way we pray it, because some of us would be in trouble. Because what you're asking the Lord to do is forgive you like you forgive others. And if the Lord really forgave you like you forgive others, you need a whole tray of communion and ask the deacons to deliver a whole box to your house. Because often we do not let go of things that are infracted against us, but yet and still we want the whole world to get over it. But what if God asked you the question, why should I get over it? If I'm going to take my cue off of you, and if I'm going to take my forgiveness moment off of your attitude, if I say, I'm going to do what you do, you show me how to do you, boo. Yes, sir. You couldn't have put them clothes on this morning. You couldn't have made it to church if you wanted to. You wouldn't have got up out that bed. They'd be carrying your behind to the same morgue they taking somebody else this morning. But I'm grateful that I hear him say, morning by morning. That's what I hear. That's what I hear. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. I hear him say, I'm slow to anger. Somebody ought to read that part of the Bible too. Plenteous in mercy, of great kindness. In other words, give me a reason to let it go. Somebody just say, I'm sorry right now, because in case you ain't said it yet. I hear the Hebrew writer say, can I go to Hebrew since y'all don't like the Old Testament yet? The Hebrew writer, yes, in that 10th chapter of Hebrews, around about the 17th verse, he declares these words, Dexter, and their sins and their iniquities I will remember no more. I don't care what you think about me. I don't care what you said about me. I don't care who you said it to. The fact is, they don't have no power to forgive like the Lord does. And their memory works too much for my taste. Because God gives himself a self-inflicted case of amnesia when it comes to me. Because when you try to bring up me to him, he's like, who, what, when? I don't have that down here. Ain't on my page. No, Steve Bland is good with me. Aren't you glad that God gives himself a case of amnesia when it comes to letting stuff go? That he puts your sins in, as the old folks say, in the sea of forgetfulness, and puts up a no fishing sign so that the devil can't come back and use it for real, for real. Oh yeah, he's the accuser. He's the deceiver. He will try to get people to disown you. Oh, listen, don't be sitting there looking at me like that. Because if your neighbor knew what you really did in your life, they would move right now. If you had the ability to look at your neighbor and see their whole life, oh, girl, oh, my God. Nasty girl. Nasty girl. Oh, you nasty girl. Thank God he let you wake up with a clean slate. Why is it then we can't let things go? Why is it that we hold on to things longer than we should? Why is it that when we declare the year of Jubilee, people find it so hard to say, Pastor, I can't forgive for that. You don't know what he did. But maybe some people can't let stuff go because they haven't grown up yet. Maybe it's a stage of status of where they are. And I can't even put that kind of fault on babies because children get over stuff quicker than some adults do. I mean, you let two children play and they can be fighting like cats and dogs, and the next 2 to 5 minutes later, they playing with each other. But we got some adults that ain't even got kid sense. I saw 2 dogs fighting each other and then go trotting off down the street together. Right after one tried to scratch the eyes out the other one. If animals got that kind of sense and children got that kind of sense, what is it about adults who act worse than kids and dogs? I don't preach rumor or innuendo. And I'll bear out what I need from the text, but I just need to set a preamble to the text. Because the world took notice when a white police officer put his knee on the neck of a black man and choked the life out of him. And the videotape of what was done and shared caused the world to see the brutality of those who were sworn to bless, to protect and serve, to be able to see a man's life inch out of him. It was that should have led to a measure of criminal justice reform that should have taken down certain kind of principles that protect that kind of brutality from man against man. But it never happened. Both federal and state, when they brought it up, people got slow memory. They still want to protect themselves, qualified immunity and everything else. You see, if an officer has to pay out of his own pocket, not out of your tax dollars, it might make them think twice before they do some things. If they got to pay and sit in the same jail that you have to sit in for murder, they might think twice before they do some things. But on this Black History Month, I just want to say to us, what do you say when 5 black officers look in the face of somebody they would call on the street if they just happen to see him, hey, bruh, and inflict the same violence that kills? Is it better? Is there any sense of difference? And I want to suggest to us today that it's another step of challenge for me, because sometimes you hear the word on the news, but then you hear the word on the street. I told you I don't speak in the human, but just in case. Somebody say just in case. In case the street news is the real news, it was stated by Ray and Peanut and them that there may have been beef with one of the officers. Oh, y'all done heard the news too. Don't be looking at me like I'm crazy. With him himself and the others who are part of this process that ends the life, all could have been because somebody couldn't get off of a beef diet that they was on. And just like we live in a world where people might have small and greater infractions. Let me say to you, when evil does what evil does, it does not stop until death occurs. And some people are the walking dead. Some people are dead, just ain't laid down yet, because folk won't let go of some things that they are continuing to inflict. And worse than a bullet from a gun is what you can sometimes say with your tongue. Death is occurring too often with too many people because you refuse to go on a no beef diet. If you want to look like your master, then why is it that you carry so much stuff? Because the truth is, the stuff you're carrying don't really hurt the other person as much as it's hurting you. Can you imagine, no matter what the outcome is an issue, can you imagine the hurt the families of those officers have to inflict and feel as a result of whatever the situation is? Can you imagine the generational pain that will happen as a result of that? Can you imagine the turning of the course of life, all because maybe, possibly, one person couldn't let it go? I'm telling you, the ripple effects suggest that you might throw the rock in the water on this side and it may not look great, but on the other side, it's a mighty roaring wave that possibly may be devastating those in its wake. You have to be careful, beloved, because in the wake of even what we're dealing with, sometimes you think that the only camera you got to deal with is the one that you are carrying on your body, but there may be a camera higher than you think. There may be a camera that's recording higher than you think, and I'm not just talking about the camera up on the pole. I'm talking about the fact that heaven always records. And I'm grateful that heaven keeps good books, because it goes to deal with the deeds sometime that we do that's good, that people don't know we did, but it also records the deeds that you did that were no good, that maybe you thought you had gotten away with. But you ought to thank God for his grace. Truth is, in this text, when I looked at that, and some of you who elected not to look at the video and others toward it, you couldn't, because of not just the issue of the brutality, but the shame. Some of you who could not look at it, like even his mother said that she didn't want to see it, it was not just because of brutality, but also because of the dishonor. Some of you could not just look at it because of the heinous nature of the crime in which it was, but sometimes you could not look at it because you saw a brother doing it to another brother. And you come to understand that we still are in the world where we cannot see brotherhood as no color versus the other. But when it is somebody from the same culture, because most crimes are crimes committed against people of the same color, the same gender, the same family. People talk about black on black crime. Well, listen, it's white on white and brown on brown and yellow on yellow. Most crime is done usually against people who know each other. It ain't just one color or one kind. But the truth is, no matter what it is, unrequited blood still cries out. Community of Memphis, to take out a handcuff who they didn't know happened to have gone to church in California to give his life to Christ. That had a pastor who did pray for him at some point of his life. They had a mama that was within inches, 100 feet or so of the house, that he was just trying to get back to wherever he was. He was living his life like everybody else. And I don't know why it is that when people get victimized, the first thing the press wants to do is go find out some sin they've committed in their life. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I mean, if the reporter had to report on themselves first before they report on who they after, it wouldn't be nothing on the paper. But let me just say, as I move this toward it, the one thing that we have to deal with before I go any further with this is that there comes a time, and the text even lets it be known, that it shows a level of immaturity when you don't do better when you know better. The text says, and the child grew. Next Sunday, I'll talk to you about how the child got here and what the whole child had to go through to get here. But the text suggests, and the child grew. What child is this? It says the child grew older, and the child's growth who grew older was someone who was born at a time when they was intentionally killing babies by the government. You think you living in times when governmental agencies are killing kids. Listen, it was the edict of the land to kill the boys then. Pharaoh's edict was kill all. Come on, talk to me here. It wasn't no accident. They were sending the popo to everybody's house. I'm telling you how bad it can get. They send it to everybody's house and say, if you see a male child, firstborn, kill him on the stool. Don't be talking about how bad it is. It's been worse and gonna get back worse if you ain't careful. There was a time when killing of that nature was by the law. That's why you gotta challenge unjust laws. The civil rights law was passed 1 year before the voting rights law, 1964. We dealt with the civil rights law, 1965, voting rights. Before you could get your voting rights, you had to get your civil right. And each one that came after came because of a killing that took place of a young boy in Mississippi. Mamie Till's boy died, and the mama said, I'll be doggone if I let this don't go unnoticed. The mama brought this heinous crime to light. And then this young upstart Thurgood Marshall, who comes into law, ends up being able to defend the work. You know the stories, how it went. And 10 years later, the laws had to change, but they refused to quit until the books change. We got to learn how to go from protest to policy change. We just can't holler about what's wrong. We got to change the policies. There are some laws on the books that's got to change. If people ain't changing them yet and their own children are dying, it means you better change them for your own. If they're not changing them and their own families are falling apart, you've got to learn how to stand up and change them for your own. Thank God that Thurgood Marshall moved from a lawyer to the Supreme Court, because God knows how to elevate people who grow and know who they are. And if you're not careful, somebody who's your color but you're not your kind can replace you on the court. Which means vigilance must be continuous, and that's how you get back to the place where you thought you had graduated from. When you look at this text, you will look to see that there was a protection that had been given, because out of all the evil that had been done, there was a young boy that made it through all of that. Raised through all of that. I'll give you more about it next week, but can I just slide in a couple of things that I want to say? The reason why Moses made it is because there were some women who decided, we ain't gonna have this happen to our children. Brothers, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but I need to get to a point that I need to say here. But I said there was some women who decided. Somebody say some women. They decided that not my boy. If there was any doubt that a woman can't protect a child or raise a child, let me just say to you, when I read in chapter 2, Moses' daddy, Amram, is mentioned in verse 1, but you don't see his name no more. But from verse 2 on, you see the pronoun she. She, before everything that happened to Jochebed's baby. She, before everything that happened from that time to the point I'm reading from. She, before everything that went down. And mamas, I'm just trying to say to you, as I come to a first point, as I'm trying to get this through, if our children are going to grow to know who they are, if daddy don't do it, stop making excuses. She is going to have to do something to protect these babies. God navigated Jochebed's riverboat through danger, seen and unseen danger, until it floated, and she had Moses' sister right alongside of it. I don't know where Amram was. Maybe he was watching the game. I don't know. Maybe he was out there kicking it with the fellas. I don't know. Maybe he was, I don't. But wherever he was, the truth is, it was the she's that got Moses protected in dangerous water. God navigated this riverboat. Pharaoh's daughter had sense enough to know when she found this baby. I tell you, I go back next week and tell you about the incident of how she came upon it. But Pharaoh's daughter had sense to know that she could not nurse a Hebrew baby without Hebrew milk. So she defied the edicts of Pharaoh DeSantis. I could have said Pharaoh 45 and y'all would have got it quicker. Who said you can't feed Black History milk to the people. Found somebody who will feed him, and sometimes the she may not be a school teacher. It may not be a school administrator. The she's that's going to protect the babies may have to feed them right there at the house. Because in order for him to grow, he got to be drinking the right milk. What better source than his own mama Jochebed? Miriam was able to navigate his path back to the ghettos of Goshen. She went back. She was go-between. She said, I ain't his mama, but I'm his sister. I wish some sisters would get together and know you just can't sit back and watch your brothers die. You got to help the connection. You got to help the protection. You got to go and help and do what you can do to make it happen. Stop beefing with your brother and save his life. You know he ain't got that money. Working at no McDonald's, you need to save his life. You know some of the stuff that he's doing is not the way it ought to go. Sometimes you can talk to him on things mama don't even know. You got to help save his life, protect his life, follow him on the Nile. Look at God at work in Moses' history. Fed by his mama, babysat by his sister, financed by Pharaoh. Yes, Jochebed fed him. She helped him to get to where he was. Why am I talking about Jochebed? Because when I looked at the issue of what was happening to this brother Tyree Nichols, who I put his name in the atmosphere, it was his mama who spoke out amidst all the evil and said, maybe God is using my son to change some things in this evil world. The only hope I have is maybe God is using my son. I said to myself, that's unfortunate that grief talks and pain in public. It's unfortunate that sometimes we see some things and we have to find the good before we do something bad. But then I heard a higher voice that says maybe she's saying something. Maybe she is pointing out something. And it hit me when I heard Brother Ben Crump come up and say, the one thing is for sure, we will no longer accept delayed justice from the brutality at the hands of those sworn to protect and serve, because within 20 days, you charged all 5 of these black guys. Let the church say, aha. I said, maybe mama got a point. Maybe something is changing the books. Maybe something is moving this thing along when they thought they'd gotten away from it with George Floyd. Maybe God can make some good come out of a bad situation, because he says the new law is now should be set that if you can find and charge people within 20 days, then we ain't waiting a year no more. Laquan McDonald, 14 months. trying to figure out what happened to him. Eric Gardner, New York, 14 months, over a year. Alton Sterling, over a year. Pamela Turner, over a year. Breonna Taylor, over a year. Ronald Green, over a year. Young Tamir Rice, Cleveland, Ohio, over a year. And we're looking at the video. We see it on the thing. You talk about what you got to go through, but in 20 days, you charge all 5 and fire them too, union all included. I wish some black police officers would wake up and smell a pizza that the unions want to protect them who they want to protect. You better listen to the wisdom of your mama. You better listen to the wisdom of your community. That while you standing behind people who talking about that they are dealing with protecting and serving, the issue is not black on black or black on white. It's blue on whatever else is on. And let me say it, and I ain't taking it back. If you want to get rid of a no snitch policy law on the streets, get rid of the no snitch policy law on the police force. And yes, there are some good and well-meaning officers, and we all always lift them up. But stop telling me it's just one or two. No. Corruption goes deeper, because when you let it fester, then people who are good get quiet. People who are good go silent. It may be one perpetrator, but why is everybody else a participator in their silence? Martin King said, it's not the ones who were the evildoers that was my greatest challenges. It was the silent bystanders that watched it happen and said nothing. Maybe what she understood was all these who are dealing with this nature, the good that can come out of this is something she called, or it was called Tyree's Law, and that is the duty to intervene. Maybe what ought to happen is you ought to start punishing people who say, I didn't do it, but you didn't do nothing. Y'all missing this. Listen, I came to sweat this out just to get this to you, and y'all acting like I ain't did nothing. Listen. I said maybe the good that comes out of this is that a grown-up perspective of what's happening is, out of all the evil, we can come up with a Tyree's Law that says we not only should have a duty not to kill, but we also ought to have a law to say there's a duty to intervene, which means if you do nothing, you go into jail the same way everybody else does. Tyree's mother said God used her son to birth a law, and maybe she's right. Maybe the new standard is to say we're not accepting anything less anymore. Kendrick Lamar said, I come from a generation where murder is minor. And we're living in a generation now where people don't see person murder as a great thing when it comes to certain people. But we've got to understand that life means something no matter whose life it is. And when he grew up, I'm still at point number one. Y'all won't help me. Y'all won't let me get off of it. Check says some things you can't see until you grow up. The reason why maybe we ain't changed the laws is because we got a toddler nation that won't grow up yet. Maybe the reason why we can't protect our own, while other countries don't have to deal with as many guns on the street, we got more guns now than people in America. Because we won't grow up. Moses, while protected in the ark, he was followed by his sister. He reared by his mother, blessed by the birth of God, but he still hadn't grown up yet. He thought he was privileged and better than other Hebrews because when his sister and mama delivered him, yes, the text was suggesting, I'll let you see next week, he had the right stuff in him, but he wasn't letting it out of him yet. Oh, God. Yes, he had some mama milk in him. He had been protected on the Nile. He had all the right upbringing, but here he is flossing in Pharaoh's house, blessed in the palace, while his people lived in huts. Blessed to eat the king's food, while his people ate slop and hugs. Blessed to sleep in the king's bed, while his people slept on slats and mats. Blessed with the best Egyptian schools, while his people were learning and hiding and told they can't learn their history. Blessed with the finest of Pharaoh's clothes, while everybody else was scrapping for hand-me-downs. But one day, the text says he grew up. Somebody said he grew up. And the question I want to raise to somebody here today is, how long will it take before you grow up? Some people live to be 80 years old and still ain't grown up. Some people, just because you get age don't mean you're grown. That's why you got 50-year-olds still living in your basement. I ain't paying no rent. Come on, ain't got no car, but they driving all the gas out of yours. Borrowing his sister car, getting his, but listen, everything else, and gonna pick you up late on top of that, and ain't got no job. Listen, ain't growed up yet. Some of y'all married to some little boys. They play with videos more than they play with you. I'm looking at my paper. I ain't looking at nobody. I'm just looking at. They talk to some people they ain't never met before online and won't even talk to their own children who's sitting next to them saying, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." Ain't grown up yet. When you hear stupid Hebrew jokes and you laugh at these racist jokes yourself and they talk about you too, you ain't grown up yet. Did other people talk about other folk just because it ain't you and you laughing? Just because you moved to Southfield and Bloomfield Hills, but they redlining your mama who's still at the bottom of the hill, you ain't grown up yet. Just because you think you got over the car insurance rule because you put your car in somebody else's name, got the DTE in somebody else's name, they gonna catch your crazy, but you ain't grown up yet. You taking advantage of people's pension and other things toward it. You done gone and your mama died 4 years ago and you still sending in the money for the checks. Let me get out of here, y'all. I'm going back to bed. Y'all ain't trying to get me. I don't care how old you get, when you think like a child, you still a child. He was protected from murder by his own people, almost. Thank God for verse 11. Oh, I wish I had time to tell you the difference in verse 10 and verse 11. Because one verse suggests he grew up physically. But verse 11 says in the Hebrew extraction, and when he was fully grown. And it came to pass when he was fully grown that he went out and he saw two brothers fighting. One of them was an Egyptian police officer. The other one was a Hebrew slave. And he saw a case of police brutality. And he was looking at this, and he identified with the police officer because he had been reared in the house where he was next in line to become one of the brothers. Oh, you do know he was the Prince of Egypt, right? Before there was ever the movie that came out. Oh, he was the next in line. He had been favored, and I told you all the stuff that he had done. But all of a sudden, his mama's teaching kicked in some kind of way. And said, I can't stand here. Wasn't nobody else around. He didn't see no cameras. But he saw an act of brutality of somebody who grew up in the same cultural experience that he had committing an act of violence on a defenseless person. The Bible says he saw the oppression. He saw what he had been looking at, but he said, today I ain't walking past this. Somebody say he grew up. And you are still a child when you look and see that somebody is beating somebody senseless and you standing there participating or saying, I ain't part of that. If you don't try to intervene some kind of way, it means you're just as childish as the person who's doing it. I don't know, either he followed the Egyptian until he thought that they were alone. I don't know if he just jumped in right when he first saw. I don't know. The text doesn't give us that. But there's always, again, the opportunity for you to do the right thing. There's always going to be a moment that comes that you got to make a choice and a decision. And it can't be what happens to me if I help that person. The question has to become, what will happen to them if I don't? Can you imagine how many times Martin King could have walked away from helping us? Can you imagine how many times I go down the list of all the men and women who were there, walked away from them who did this? But how did Moses get to that place? Maybe because his mama, when she was nurturing him as a boy, was whispering in his ear and letting him know about Abraham. Maybe she was whispering in his ear and calling out the name of Jacob and Israel. And maybe she told him about the story of Moses. Maybe she was talking about Sarah, and she was talking about all of those who were in his history, and she deposited it somewhere down deep within. So when he got to a place when he looked and saw something that didn't look right and feel right, his mama came up in him and he said, I gotta do something. Mamas, I'm telling you, read to your children, talk to your children, keep nurturing them. They may not be acting right now, they may not be looking right now, but you may be putting something in them that might get up and stop something from happening. Maybe it won't stop the person who's doing it, but it can stop somebody else and say, hey, man, I ain't doing this. How many people in jail because they just didn't get out the car? How many people right now are suffering the rest of their life all because they had to go along with their friend? We just think we went to third grade together, yeah, and you going to jail together. How many people who could have just said, stop now, I don't know what, but what's on your mind? At some point, the duty to intervene has got to kick in. Moses looked and he saw, and he didn't need no Tyree's law. He just grew up. He didn't need nobody to tell him. He thought he was all alone. But can I throw this in here for free? There's somebody's watching you all the time. I'm almost done. There's always somebody who sees what you're doing, whether you know they see what you're doing or not. Those 5 who thought they were inflicting the pain, thought they were alone, but they didn't know that the whole world was watching. And that's long before the cameras ever came out that you got it right now. You sure need to be crazy or careful what you're crazy, but because there's people watching all the time. If you try to help your own, sometimes they'll hurt you worse than the person they after. I'm about to turn the corner. When I tell you, I remember that moment myself. I was in Kansas City, just had birth a son. I don't know if it was Stephen or Brandon, but I remember I was on my way across the bridge from Kansas to Missouri, driving in the car that sometimes you had to fill up with oil and check the gas. So, you know, when I get it started, I don't want to stop till I get where I'm going. Oh, yeah, y'all remember some of them days. I'm driving across this bridge, and I'm just trying to make sure I get to the church or the job where I was going. I was on my way, and as I was coming to the other side, had just come over it and got to a red light. Pulled up at the red light and looked over next to me, and I saw this man who was fussing at a woman on the other side. And yes, I saw her say something back. I don't know what it was. My windows was up. But all I saw was his fist go back like it went to Georgia. And I saw him swing and deliver a blow that put her face into the next window. I saw her jump out the car. And I saw him slam on the brakes and get out and go around the car to go and seemingly finish her off. I wasn't thinking about the gas. I wasn't thinking about my car. I wasn't thinking about anything, but something about my mama's training in me caused me to stop my car. I pulled over to the side and I ran. And I jumped behind him and I grabbed him and I said, baby, just run, just run. And she didn't run that way. She ran toward me and said, leave my man alone. Leave my man alone. I got my crazy butt right back in the car. Got my little gas money and I said to myself, some folks you just can't help. But when I got to the church, I felt good about the fact that I tried. I felt good about the fact that I didn't just drive by. I felt good about the fact I didn't have to sleep that night wondering if he killed her or not. I said, whatever happens, she asking for it, but I tried. Somebody look at your neighbor and say, I tried to tell you to stay awake. I tried to tell you to say amen. I tried to tell you to listen. Listen, somebody tried to help your crazy self. You better learn how to use what somebody tried to teach you and intervene. Why? Because when you grow up, come out and say, I got to grow up. I find the strength to stand for my own. I'm telling somebody here that when you grow up, you can stand for your own. Moses learned when he grew up that he could stand because he saw something happening and he said, there go I, but by the grace of God. Can I get a witness here? He said, I can stand on my own and for my own. He saw differently than he had been looking at all his life. Maybe he didn't understand the issues of what we now call racism or sexism or unfair labor practices, a brick without straw. Maybe he didn't realize that he was in the privileged house while other people were dealing with unfair labor laws and he was the passive beneficiary. He grew up and said, if I don't intervene, something's going to happen that's going to hurt them. He saw someone committing an act of police brutality. I'm almost done. And define them as one of his own. You got to see people, no matter what color they are, as one of your own. The issue was not black on black or black on white or white on brown or brown on, no, it was blue on whatever that was the problem. It was brutality of a system beating down an oppressed person. It was the fact of somebody with a badge sworn to protect and serve, taking advantage of a system, a citizen he was supposed to be uplifting. It don't matter what color they are. Everybody is one of God's own. And when you can learn how to stand for your own, then you can learn how to stand against your own. Because the text says that when he stood and felt good about the fact that he protected this brother, even though it meant that somebody died in the process. Verse 13 said the next day he went out. And one of his own. He saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, why are you hitting your brother? Verse 14 says, the man said, who you think you are? Revised Bland Version. In other words, who made you a ruler and judge over me? And then they went to their hood talk. You thinking about killing me like you did bruh the other day? And Moses understood that what he had done was not in private. Moses then understood that what he had done had been known by more people than he thought. And he asked himself the question, why is fighting for us means sometime I got to fight us too? But I need to say to somebody that sometimes you got to fight for your own, and sometimes you got to fight against your own. You got to call a spade, no matter what color the spade is. Why? Because you got people who declare that they're going to stay on a beef diet no matter what nobody say. How many people would still be alive or still be together if it wasn't for the beef diet that happens in our own country? Oh, it's Black History Month. I ain't talking about nobody else. I'm talking about us. We got some people in our own culture. We got some people of our own kind. Spike Lee came out with a movie that made a whole bunch of people mad. Oh, yeah. If I call the name of it, some of y'all get up and walk out now. But he got mad because he exposed, yes, some of the hypocrisy that happens in our own culture. Yeah, he talked about the wannabes from the jigaboos. Come on, talk to me here. Talked about the inequities on college campuses. Talked about natural hair versus weaves. Yes, he talked about how people with braids and dreads mad with people with updos and perms, and kick it versus nappy, and afro versus twisty. We got people who light skin versus dark skin. People who are AKA against people who are DST. We got people who are a part of one Greek organization against another, and ain't none of them born in Greece. Willing to kill each other over colors and can't see the color they all are. What would have happened if Notorious B.I.G. could have gotten over the general beef that was being brought up by Tupac? What could have happened if Master P could have gotten over the beef that seemingly was coming up with P. Diddy? Eminem versus Insane Clown Posse. Cash Money versus No Limit. East Coast hip hop versus West Coast rap. Britney Spears versus Christina Jada Kiss versus Beyonce Siegel. P. Diddy versus J-Lo. Old Destiny Child against New Destiny Child. Bloods versus Crip. Latin King versus Unknown. Peoples versus Folk. GD versus Vice Lord. Black versus white. Lawton versus Cleaner. Light skin versus dark skin. Thick lip white. Thin lip white. That big flat chest versus big breast. No behind versus the big behind. East side versus west side. People who are fat versus skinny. More money against no money. PhD against GED. Students versus teacher. Teacher versus the principal. Principal versus the union. The union versus superintendent. Superintendent versus school board. School board versus anybody who ain't going to school. Freshman versus sophomore. Sophomore versus junior. Junior versus senior. People who don't go to school versus everybody. Everybody want to get against that. Unless modern day be Harry Meghan versus the royal family. Sarah Jessica Parker versus Kim Cattrall. And they both in the second city. Naomi Campbell against Tyra Banks. We got Will Smith against Chris Rock against Academy Awards because someone talked about his wife. He won't slap the taste out of his mouth. Pete Davidson versus Kanye West. Kanye West versus Taylor Swift. Kanye West versus ex-wife Kim Kardashian. Kanye West against the Jewish community. Kanye West versus the black community. Kanye West versus Kanye West. People don't know they got beef with each other, and sometimes a beef with your doggone self. What would happen if we got over our beef diet? I'm out of here. My phone is shouting. But can I tell you here that sometimes you got to learn how to stand not only for your own. Sometimes you got to learn how to stand against your own. Now, sometimes you got to learn how to stand by your own. Can I get a witness here? What are you talking about, preacher? You see, sometimes it feels like you're standing all by yourself. Have you ever been like that? Where you have to stand and it looked like you're standing all by yourself. Yes, you stood to try to help white folk and they don't accept you. After all you did to make them feel good about you. Then you come back in your own community and you fight for your own folk and they think you passing and think that you think you more than you think you are. And you can't stand even with people who you thought you were fighting for. You go home and your own family don't want to fool with you because they think that your growing up means you graduated from them. Sometimes it feels like a lonely experience when you stand for what you know is right. Sometimes when you get rid of the no snitch policy and start talking about the stuff that's got to get rid of our community, people will look at you and say, I don't believe you turned them in. And you got to look back and say, I don't believe you didn't turn them in. Because one thing I've learned to do, I've learned that eagles don't fly in flocks. I've learned, yes, that only chickens hang in groups. I've learned that if I die, let me die, because I'm not standing by myself. If you give the best you have and you know the Lord stands with you, is there a witness in this house that knows if Jesus goes with me, you can go anywhere? If Jesus stands with you, you can stand anywhere. If Jesus stands up in you, that you got the power to speak truth to power. And somebody in this house needs to say, I'm on a no beef diet because I don't have no beef with God, because he ain't got no beef with me. If he can forgive me, I can forgive you. If he can stand for me, I can stand for you. If he can stand with me, I can stand with you. Is there anybody here that glad that Jesus came along? And when we were still in our sins, he stood by our side. He stood by a cross. Somebody come and go by Calvary with me. He stood on Golgotha's hill. No sin at all in his life. Nothing he done to any man. But look at the police brutality. They put a crown of thorns on his head. Nobody said anything. They put a spear in his side. Nobody did anything. They took and they began to feed him vinegar for water. They did everything they could. Thank God for at least one black man that helped them carry the cross as far as he could. But then they got rid of him too. Sometimes you got to go to the cross all by yourself. Can I get a witness here? Must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free? Somebody say, no, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. The consecrated cross I'll bear till death shall set me free, and then go home my crown to wear, for I know there's a crown for me. Somebody start clapping your hands, because you know you're not on your own. You're not standing by yourself. You're not living by yourself. You're not working by yourself. You're not witnessing by yourself. He walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me that I'm his own, and the joy that we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Somebody give God some praise. Somebody give God some glory. Somebody shout for Zion and say, God is good. He came to seek and save those who were lost. He came to grant us life more abundantly. He came to set the captives free. If you're living according to your works and you're living according to your ways, look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, you are a sinner. You were a captive. You were a slave. You were bound. But thank God that Satan had me bound. But Jesus lifted me. Freedom is when the Son sets you free. Somebody know he went to Calvary all by himself. But look at the number of people who the Son set free. Somebody say, I'm getting ready to stand up and I don't need my neighbor to help me. I'm getting ready to get up, and I don't need to ask my neighbor permission. I'm ready to get on my own 2 feet. And as you stand on your feet, somebody declare, for God I'll live, for God I'll die. And if the Son set me free, my job is to set somebody else free. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, if you're not standing, let me pull you up. If you're already standing, let me say, come and go with me. Somebody look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, if we're free, let's go free up some more. Somebody asked Harriet Tubman, how was it that you had a blow to your head and you still freed up all of those captives? She said, first of all, I'd have freed some more if they just knew they were slaves. She said, but the other thing, she said, because I took the blow to my head, I had blackouts sometime. And they said, well, how could you do it if you were suffering from blackouts? She said, well, when I was conscious, I was walking people to freedom. And when I blacked out, freedom came down and walked with me. Somebody ought to give God praise, because God walks with you when you're not even conscious that you're in the world. He takes care of you when you can't take care of yourself. And I'm glad. I said, I'm glad I can stand for my own. I can stand against my own, but I can stand by my own Savior and Lord, named Jesus the Christ. Because if nobody else stands by me, when the storms of life are raging, somebody say, he stands by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship out on the sea, thou who rulest winds and waters, somebody know he'll stand by you. The text suggests to us that if there's nobody else in life that's ever stood for you or by you, thank God for Jesus. Because the only way you made it this far is somebody who stood by you.